In this problem, we're asked to find the new amount. We have 145 gallons. We're going to decrease that by 60%, and I want to know what is the new amount. Because we haven't really looked at this situation of a percentage of decrease in a long extended format, I'm going to do that in this video. And I know last time I started with a red bar, so let me do that again. So this bar represents everything that I'm starting with. And it's really important in all of these problems that you always identify what are you starting with. And in this problem, I am starting with 145 gallons. The 145 gallons that I'm starting with is all of it or 100% of it. It is really important to know what your original number is, or what is your starting value. Decreased by 60%. So I am going to lose 60%. And losing that 60% means that I'm losing a certain number of these 145 gallons. I don't know what that is at the moment, but I'll figure it out. And it also means that I'm going to end with a certain number of gallons here. So let's fill this number in. If I started with 100% and I lose 60%, my ending spot here is that I'm going to be left with 40%. I'm going to be left with 40% of what I started with. Just like in the last example where there were 4 different ways to think it through, there's 4 different ways to think this through. 2 with using a proportion, 2 with using the percentage equation. Because I spent so much time in the last video kind of setting those up and explaining it, I'm going to go through these ones a little more quickly. So one way to do it would be to find what is 60% of 145. So always, 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 think of your starting number with your percent equation. Think of that as your whole amount. So what is 60% of 145? And make sure that you understand that when you take 60% of your whole amount, the 60% of 145, because this is the decrease, I'm going to get this number. I'm going to get the amount that I lost. Not going to be the final answer to this question, which is asking for the new amount. But once I know how much I lost, I will be able to just take 145 minus that value to get what this value would be. So 60% of 145, just to save some time here, I'll use the calculator. So let's clear this out. I'm going to do 60% times 145, and you are welcome to use your calculator on these problems. It'd be 87. So I'm losing 87. That is what 60% of the 145 is. All right, so where am I at now if I lose 87? So if I do 145 minus 87, I can do a little bit of borrowing here. And 15 minus 7 would be 8. 13 minus 8 would be 5. So my new amount is going to be 58. So this would be 58 gallons. And how did I get that number? Let's write that down here. So 60% of 145 was 87. And then I took the 145 that I started with, subtracted out the 87 that I lost. I ended with 58 gallons. Now, the other way, instead of doing this in 2 steps and calculating how much you lost and then subtracting how much you lost from your original, why not just do it in 1 step? If I'm losing 60%, I now have 40% of what I started with. So let me pick a new color here. So if I do 40% of 145, that is going to get me the answer right away. It should give me this 58, but let's just type it in my calculator just so that you can see it. 40% of 145. So I'm going to do 40%, which in decimal form is 0.4. Always work with a decimal. with these percent equations. 40% of 145 is 58. So I verified it in 2 different ways that my answer was 58, and that's 58 gallons. And I guess I can move this to see the answer. But let's take a look at real quick the proportion idea. So proportion idea number 1. If I'm decreasing 60%, I'm losing 60 out of every 100. Losing 60 out of every 100 is the same thing as losing how many out of every 145. And when I solve this proportion, I can reduce this quite a bit. I can divide by 10, that's 6 out of 10. Divide by another 2, it's going to make this 3 out of 5. So really you're dividing by 20 on the top and the bottom to get it in one step. So 3 out of every 5 is how many out of 145? And I already know what this answer is going to give me. Losing 60 out of every 100 is the same as losing 87 out of 145. But just so you can see the math work out, cross multiply. 5 times x is 5x. 145 times 3. So if I have 145 times 3, 3 times 5 is 15, 3 times 4 is 12, plus the 1 is 13, carry the 1, 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4, so that would give me 435, and then divide by 5, so 435 divided by 5, 5 won't go into 4, but it will go into 43 8 times, 8 times 5 is 40, subtract, you get 35. 5 goes into 35 7 times, and 5 times 35 would be, or 7 times 5 would be 35. Subtract, you get 0, and there it is. There's the 87. One more way. Instead of saying, and then of course, like I was saying before, this is what you've lost. So this is what you've lost, or this is your decrease. This is not your new amount. This is your decrease. To solve it in one step with a proportion, instead of saying, I'm losing 60 out of every 100, say that I'm ending with having 40 out of every 100. So what I'm left with, if I lost 60%, I have 40 out of every 100 that I started with. That means having how many out of every 145? And we can reduce this fraction to make the numbers a little easier to work with. Divide by 10, 4 out of 10, divide by 2. So 2 out of every 5 is the same thing as x out of 145. Cross multiply. 5 times x is 5x. 2 times 145. If we work that out real quick, that would be 290. And divide both sides by 5. I'm running out of room here. 290 divided by 5. I'll use my calculator to speed this up a little bit. 290 divided by 5. And there's that number 58 again, 58 gallons.